Tornado of Terror Tatsumaki, the strongest Esper in the One Punch Man verse, versus YT Poison, the strongest Esper in Mob Psycho. This is a matchup that's been requested countless times since the very beginning of my channel, and it doesn't take an effort of mind squeezing to understand why. Both are characters created by the same author one, and both are Espers that uses telekinesis and psychokinetic powers. They're also portrayed as beings with unfathomable levels of powers that 99% of their verse are either fascinated by or afraid of. This matchup was also made by Death Battle years ago, and I do remember even when I wasn't really that invested in power scaling, I could still see a lot of holes in their logic. Granted, to be fair, at that time, Tatsumaki didn't have most of her impressive feats. However, that doesn't really matter anyways, since we're going to be talking about every single relevant aspect about this matchup, analyze their abilities and level of power to determine who is one's strongest Esper. Unlike the One Punch Man universe, which features multiple fascinating power systems, Mob Psycho 100 centers almost entirely around psychic abilities, telepathy, psychokinesis, and other forms of extrasensory perception. The people who wield these powers are known as Espers, and so at the heart of the story is Shigeo Kageyama, better known as Mob, who is widely regarded as one of the strongest, if not the strongest Esper in the entire series. What most viewers understand about Mob is that his power seems to fluctuate based on his emotional state. His strength is represented as a percentage, and as that percentage rises, so does the intensity of his abilities. And naturally, this leads many to assume that when Mob reaches 100, he's using 100% of his power. While that's how it is in most cases, that's not exactly how it works. The percentage doesn't measure how much of his psychic power he's using, it measures how overwhelmed he is by a specific emotion. Mob, in fact, always has access to his immense energy. The difference being is that he constantly suppresses it. As his emotional percentage climbs, he stops focusing on restraint and instead gives in to whatever he's feeling. So reaching 100% doesn't automatically mean he's unleashing his full power. It simply means that a particular emotion, whether it's friendship, sadness, gratitude, or something else, has absolutely reached its peak. In those cases, he isn't necessarily abandoning control, he's just fully embracing that emotion. However, when the emotion is something darker, anger, rage, hostility, or even murderous intent, the likelihood of seeing Mob's true, unrestrained power becomes much more higher, simply for the fact that those emotions cloud his judgment and make it harder for him to hold himself back. The key point for all of this, I guess, is that Mob at 10% is still fundamentally just as powerful as Mob at 100%. The real difference isn't the amount of power he has, it's whether he chooses to restrain himself. And when he does stop holding back, when he's truly serious, his control and creativity with his abilities reach another level. In those moments, he doesn't just fight harder, he uses his powers with such precision and instinct that he sometimes comes up with techniques he has never ever attempted before. And speaking of abilities, and it's an important factor regarding this matchup, Mob has demonstrated a wide range of distinctive abilities on multiple occasions. He can separate his spiritual self from his physical body, sense how powerful an Esper is and whether they have malicious intent, and generate a force field that lets him detect other Espers within a 20-kilometer radius. He's also capable of granting powers to people and most notably absorbing energy from everything around him, including other Espers. These types of abilities are just a fraction of what he can do, as he also has resistance to mind and empathic manipulation. Just thinking about manipulating Mob gets your brain completely fried. Now, it's important to note that many of these abilities have limits, and those limits depend heavily on Mob's emotional state. However, the narrative strongly implies that when he enters his unknown form, those restrictions practically disappear. His powers at that point are almost limitless within the series. Alright, now that we've gone over Mob's abilities and limitations, let's get into the more intriguing question: how strong is Mob really? You see, Death Battle, when they covered this matchup, actually brought up what is arguably Mob's most insane on-screen feat. However, However, for some reason, they chose not to include it. I'm specifically talking about what happened inside Mogami's world. There's this idea floating around that what Mob accomplished in that world somehow doesn't count because it didn't happen in the real world. But there's no solid foundation for that claim. Nothing in the story suggests his power was artificially boosted or restricted in a way that would make it inapplicable outside of that space. At the end of the day, power is power. While inside Mogami's world, Mob used 100% of his strength and completely blew it apart. His output was calculated to be equivalent to 8.35 exatons of TNT. And the scary part, that's likely not even his ceiling, as after that he goes on to fight Toichiro Suzuki, more known as the boss, who gives him a similarly high difficulty battle. It actually gets to the point where Mob genuinely believed he might die. Keep in mind that Mob destroyed Mogami's world before accessing his unknown state, but against Suzuki, he reached the point where he felt like he couldn't contain boss's full reserve of power and was certain he won't be able to survive the clash. This highly indicates that the boss exceeds Mob's 100% state, and this would be relevant when we talk about the question marks form. Now, we certainly don't have an exact confirmed multiplier, but we can certainly infer that the gap is massive based on the boss's reaction in the final arc. According to his son, Suzuki believed he could still win against Mob, but after just 3 exchanges, he's completely shocked by the overwhelming difference in strength. As a matter of fact, when he absorbs a casual attack from Mob and suddenly feels like he's closed the gap, it strongly implies that a casual attack from an unknown Mob could rival or even surpass 100% Mob's full output. And so, if we conservatively estimate that question marks Mob is just 10 times stronger than his 100% state, and honestly speaking, that's not a far-fetched assumption, this would put him at roughly 83 exatons of TNT, which would make him moon level in terms of attack potency and destructive capacity. Bear in mind that a 10 times multiplier could be an insane lowball, as he could be much stronger. Now, when it comes to the speed department, in episode 10, Tiro blatantly tells Mob that he flew there at the speed of light. I personally double-checked the translations and he did say that word for word. However, this specific statement was only said in the anime. They just replaced him saying he rushed to "I flew there at the speed of light," which, to be frankly honest, makes it extremely shaky to use. The highest recorded speed feat in the entire verse, however, is 100% Mob fragmenting Mogami's world at 5,000 times the speed of sound, which makes him massively hypersonic plus. And knowing that increase in psychic powers means a guaranteed boost in physical attributes, the highest you can currently give Mob is him being sub-relativistic plus when accessing his question mark state. And with all of this being said, can he hang against One Punch Man's strongest Esper? Tatsumaki is hands down the strongest hero other than Blast, King, and Saitama, considered to be the Hero Association's strongest weapon and described as a monster even by the likes of Black S and Psycho Orochi. Her powers are stated to be the fruit of a divine realm that surpasses human knowledge, capable of moving all creation. While this description is intentionally hyperbolic, it serves to explain that her psychokinetic mastery operates on a plane that utterly defies conventional human understanding. This immense power manifests in vast and versatile arsenal, as she can manipulate objects on a grander scale, impose absolute physical restraints, send psychokinetic energy, craft convincing decoys, and manifest insanely durable barriers. Each ability is made possible not just by mere skill, but also by her sheer overwhelming magnitude of psychokinetic energy. To truly understand how strong she is, you first need to look at where she stands in terms of inverse scaling. Tatsumaki has shown that she can fight against Psycho Orochi even while heavily restricted, and Psycho Orochi is certainly not just any opponent, as she's considered to be the fusion, or for better words, merge of Psychos and Orochi, amplified even further by the mysterious entity known as God. This alone potentially places her above Orochi's previous state. This is highly important since Orochi himself was able to draw energy from the planet's core, which is an absolutely insane feat that's been capped at around 194 exatons of TNT. This is actually considered as a low ball since the calc assumes it took him 2 full minutes to absorb the energy, when in reality it could have taken far less time. The scaling in fact is actually further supported by Psycho Orochi casually spamming multi-continental plus level of energy beams that Tatsumaki can block or completely stop without even breaking a sweat. As a matter of fact, labeling Tatsumaki as only moon level based on the Gaia Cannon calc feels incredibly unjustful, as during her fight with Saitama, she outright states that the only 2 people that could withstand her at full power are Blast and Saitama. On top of that, as we said before, Black Ass did place her on the same pedestal as the caved bully himself. All of this firmly suggests that she potentially scales far above the Gaia Cannon feats. Now, when it comes to speed, I think it's pretty consistent that most high tier characters, especially someone on her level, are far above the speed of light. I'm not saying she operates exactly at Flashy Flash's peak speed, but she should at least be within the same general range. As during her fight with Saitama, she's able to react to and attack Sonic, and just one arc later, Sonic is portrayed as relative to Flashy Flash. Flashy Flash himself has low ball estimations, putting him at 4 times the speed of light. So scaling wise, she comfortably sits in that relativistic to faster than light bracket. There's also an older statement from Murata suggesting that Tatsumaki can throw objects at relativistic plus speeds compared to Gyuganshu. The main difference being is that Gyuganshu can eliminate the friction between objects and air. However, that statement dates back to a time where Tatsumaki wasn't meant to be nearly as powerful as she is now. A later statement makes it clear that the 3 generals would have almost zero chance of defeating Orochi, and we've already established that Orochi scales below Tatsumaki. So the idea that Gyuganshu would be equal to or faster than her feels outdated and inconsistent with the current portrayal, which means at this point it's far more reasonable to place Tatsumaki somewhere in the relativistic plus range to multiple times faster than light. With all of this being said, could Tatsumaki defeat the strongest as per White Tea Poison? Now, a lot of people don't know this, but Tatsumaki actually makes a small Easter egg appearance in the Mob Psycho 100 manga. In chapter 8, she's shown as an example of a powerful psychic user. But what makes this even more interesting is that one himself was once asked who would win in a fight between Mob and Tatsumaki, and his answer was both direct and vague at the same time, as he said that Tatsumaki would likely defeat 100% Mob, but he wasn't sure what would happen against Mob's unknown state. But the problem is, this statement is pretty outdated, as at the time, both characters were still early in their respective series. Tatsumaki's feats have skyrocketed since then, and Mob scaling has increased significantly, especially in later arcs. So instead of relying on an old author comment, it makes more sense to look at their actual feats, statements, and portrayal. You see, at 100%, Mob was able to unleash enough power to destroy Mogami's constructed world, and attack often calculated at multi-continental levels of energy. While that's actually extremely impressive, we see something similar with Tatsumaki during her fight with Psycho Orochi. After regaining her focus and stopping herself from holding back, she was able to completely stop and overpower a multi-continental beam. But here's the key difference. Mob appeared to be going all out against Mogami. He pushed himself to the brink and immediately fell into his question mark state just right after. On the other hand, Tatsumaki stopped Psycho Orochi's beam that is more powerful than Mogami's constructed world while still looking relatively composed. This alone strongly suggests that Tatsumaki scales above 100% Mob, which actually lines up with one's original statement. However, if we look at the low-end calculation for the Gaia Cannon feat, this attack alone is estimated to be roughly 20 plus times stronger than Mob's Mogami's feat. So even with the generous scaling, 100% Mob is still significantly weaker than Tatsumaki's portrayed level of strength in the One Punch Man verse. The only way to close that gap is through Mob's unknown states. But here's the issue, we don't have an exact confirmed multiplier for that form. Some fans argue that it could be a 10 times increase based on Reigen's 1000% power, since that was supposed to be Mob's full power channeled through Reigen. Even if we accept this interpretation, it still wouldn't be enough to surpass a low-ball Tatsumaki. However, Mob does have one potential advantage that could drastically affect the outcome, that being using the ability of energy absorption. So listen, while both characters are portrayed as overwhelmingly powerful espers with versatile abilities, Mob has consistently demonstrated a more nuanced and technical use of psychic powers. He's shown the ability to absorb and redirect psychic energy even when it exceeds his own. He's done this both through direct contact and without touching his opponents. There's absolutely no clear reason to assume that this ability wouldn't work on Tatsumaki. And unlike Mob, Tatsumaki has never shown the ability to absorb psychic energy in the same way, especially not in a situation where it mattered, like her fight with Psycho Orochi. So theoretically speaking, Mob's best win condition would be to continuously absorb and redirect Tatsumaki's power, slowly and steadily draining her until the gap closes. He's only going to get stronger and she will get marginally weaker. If we assume she's only around twice as strong as him using lowball estimations, then that scenario is certainly not impossible. While I wouldn't think that Tatsumaki wouldn't notice that Mob is doing that, we sadly know that she doesn't have the best awareness of how much energy she has left in the tank, as seen when she was surprised she started coughing up blood against Psycho Orochi. Bear in mind that this is us being completely generous to Mob, because the moment we factor in Tatsumaki's superior speed scaling, things get comedically messy. She should realistically be far faster than anything Mob has ever reacted to. If she fights seriously and moves at speeds he can't really comprehend, his absorption strategy could fall apart instantly, which means for Mob to win this, you'd have to stack the odds heavily in his favor. Assume his unknown state is at least 20 times stronger than his 100% form, ignore the significant speed gap, use the lowest scaling for Tatsumaki, assume she has no counter to energy absorption, and also assume Mob's absorption ability has no limits. However, with Tatsumaki, she can blitz him anytime, one-shot him with her strongest attack before he has a chance to use abilities, which is in her character to do, and completely overpower him if we use a more believable meta of her strength. So realistically speaking, Tatsumaki should win this fight the vast majority of the time. The only way it becomes truly competitive is if Mob's question marks multiplier is far greater than we assume it to be. Maybe it's 100 times stronger, and maybe he gets exponentially stronger than before. And until we get clearer scaling on that form, and probably we wouldn't, Tatsumaki remains the safer pick.